My name is Chloe Myers. I am 20 years old and I was exactly one shift away from packing my life into garbage bags. Wednesday afternoon, April, a diner booth in Portland, Oregon. I had a bottle of blue Windex in my hand, an eviction notice hanging over my head, and a stepdad demanding $800 a month to let me sleep on concrete. The bell above the glass door chimed. The diner linoleum squeaked. My 80-year-old grandfather came rolling through the entrance. He grabbed the edge of my table before I could wipe it down. "Kid, open this folder." He was breathing hard. His hands were shaking. He had taken bolt cutters to a steel toolbox. "You thought you were a failure. You accepted everything. I was not a failure." And what happened inside that dusty manila envelope would unravel 2 years of psychological torture and bankrupt the man who thought he had broken me. Every story here is about dignity, boundaries, and the kind of justice that does not need to shout. If this one resonates with you, drop a comment below, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a story. Now, let me take you back to the spring of 2024, to a booth at Hank's Grill on 82nd Avenue, and the day I finally believed I was completely worthless. Growing up in Southeast Portland, there were 2 kids in our house, but only one who mattered. My stepbrother Tyler came out of the womb with a silver spoon, always getting the new baseball cleats, the car at 16, the easy praise. My mother Sarah tried to balance it out, but she worked double shifts at Providence Hospital. My stepdad Greg managed a regional distribution center for auto parts. He valued 2 things above all else: control and financial leverage. Tyler delivered on the obedience. I was the quiet one, the one with my nose in AP history textbooks, praying education was my way out. I wasn't rebellious, but Greg always looked at me like I was a bad investment. My mother died right before my senior year of high school, breast cancer. It was fast. After that it was just me, Greg and Tyler. I threw myself into college applications. I applied to 6 schools, including 4 Ivy Leagues. I paid the $75 application fees myself using cash I saved from my weekend job bagging groceries. On a Thursday in April, Greg sat me down at the kitchen table. He had the mail. He slid 4 thin, standard-sized envelopes across the table. All rejection letters, standard print, no signature. "You aim too high," he said. He didn't look sad. He looked justified. "College isn't for everyone. You need to start paying rent if you're staying under my roof." For 2 years I worked a dead-end shift at Hank's Grill, earning exactly $14.50 an hour. I lived in the unfinished basement of Greg's house. It smelled like wet cinder blocks and old laundry. Every first of the month, I handed Greg $800 in cash. If I was a day late, he added a $50 penalty. I watched Tyler go off to Oregon State on Greg's dime. I served bad coffee to truck drivers from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., feeling like a ghost. I stopped drawing. I stopped reading. When you are told by every major university that you aren't good enough, and the man raising you charges you to sleep near a leaky water heater, you start to believe you deserve it. The only reason I stayed was Grandpa Milton, my mom's dad. He was 80 years old, an Air Force veteran, and his lungs were failing. He lived in the guest room upstairs. He had a worn green veteran hat he never took off. He was on oxygen, but his mind was sharp. He used to sit on the porch and watch Greg. He never liked him. "That man counts pennies that don't belong to him," Grandpa Milton told me once. Last month, Grandpa's condition got worse. The doctor said he had maybe 6 months. Greg immediately started talking about costs, how much the oxygen cost, how much the extra groceries cost. Last week, I came home from the diner at 3:15 p.m. I walked around to the back door. The garage was open. Greg was standing by his workbench. He had a massive, heavy-duty red steel toolbox, the kind with a built-in combination lock. He was stuffing paperwork into it, not auto shop manuals, manila folders. When he saw me, he slammed the lid shut so hard the metal clanged. "What are you looking at?" he snapped. "Just putting my apron away," I said. I noticed he was sweating. Greg never sweat. He locked the padlock and put the key on his keyring. "I need the basement cleared out by next month," he said, not looking at me. "Tyler wants to set up a home gym for the summer." I stood there. I was paying $800 a month for a concrete floor, and he was kicking me out for a weight rack. I didn't fight back. I just nodded and walked to the basement. The damp air hit my face. I sat on my mattress on the floor. 3 days later, Greg sent a group text to me, Tyler, and Grandpa Milton. He didn't do it in person. He did it from his office. "Family meeting tomorrow night in the dining room, 7 p.m. sharp. We are discussing the house layout and Milton's care expenses. Be there." He framed it like a corporate budget meeting. But I knew what it was. It was an eviction notice. I stared at the group text on my cracked phone screen. The battery was at 14%. The basement felt colder than usual. I had exactly $342 in my checking account. If Greg kicked me out, I couldn't even afford the security deposit on a cheap studio apartment. I didn't sleep that night. I just listened to the water heater hum and tried to figure out how I was going to pack my life into garbage bags. Thursday at 6:55 p.m., I walked upstairs. The dining room table was polished oak. Greg was already sitting at the head. He had a yellow legal pad, a silver desk calculator, and a stack of printed bank statements. He looked like a loan officer. Tyler sat to his right, texting on his phone, not even looking up when I walked in. A minute later, I heard the squeak of wheels. I helped push Grandpa Milton into the room. His oxygen tank hissed a steady, rhythmic sound. He parked his wheelchair at the opposite end of the table, his green veteran hat pulled low. Greg tapped his pen against the calculator. "Let's keep this brief," he said, not looking at me. "Property taxes went up. Utilities are up. Tyler is transferring to the main campus in the fall, which means tuition is doubling." Tyler finally looked up from his phone. "I need the basement cleared by the 15th. The squat rack is being delivered on the 18th. I swallowed hard. "I work 40 hours a week, Greg. I pay you $800 on the dot." "Where am I supposed to go?" Greg didn't blink. "You're 20 years old. Figure it out. You aren't in school. You aren't building a career. This house is an asset, and right now you are a liability." The room went completely quiet. Not a shocked quiet, a cold, accepted quiet. Tyler smirked and went back to typing. I gripped the edge of the oak table so hard my knuckles turned white, but I didn't say a word. I had been told I was a failure so many times that I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. But Greg wasn't done. He turned his chair toward Grandpa Milton. "Milton, we need to have a realistic conversation about your care," Greg said, his voice dropping into that fake, gentle tone people use when they are about to do something awful. "The home nurse visits are getting expensive. Medicare only covers a fraction. I toured the Pine Ridge Care Facility off Highway 26 yesterday. They have a bed opening up next month." Grandpa Milton's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. Pine Ridge wasn't a care facility. It was a state-run warehouse for the elderly. It smelled like bleach and boiled cabbage. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it was where families sent people they wanted to forget. "My daughter's life insurance policy paid off this house," Grandpa said. His voice was raspy, but it didn't shake. "Sarah left a $200,000 policy. That money was supposed to cover my medical, and it was supposed to help these kids." Greg sighed heavily, like a teacher dealing with a slow student. "That money is gone, Milton. It went to hospital bills. It went to the mortgage. There is nothing left. The math is the math." He tapped the silver calculator. "This meeting is adjourned." Greg stood up, grabbed his legal pad, and walked into the living room to turn on the baseball game. Tyler grabbed an apple from the bowl and followed him. They left me and Grandpa sitting in the dining room alone. I stood up and started gathering the empty water glasses from the table. I felt numb. "I'll start looking for extra shifts," I whispered. "Maybe I can find a roommate on Craigslist. I won't let him send you to Pine Ridge, Grandpa." Grandpa Milton didn't answer right away. He was staring at the empty chair where Greg had been sitting. His jaw was clenched tight. He reached up and adjusted his green hat. "Hospital bills don't drain 200 grand in 3 months, Grandpa muttered, his eyes narrowing. He looked at me, his gaze suddenly sharp. "When those colleges rejected you, did you ever see the actual letters?" I stopped wiping the table. "What? The letters, did you open them?" "No," I said, confused. Greg brought the mail in. He handed them to me. They were standard business envelopes. The return addresses were from the admissions offices. "Why?" Grandpa wheeled himself backward, turning toward the hallway. "Because Greg is a man who loves his paperwork," he said, his voice dropping to a low grit. "And men who love paperwork always keep the evidence." "What time does your shift start tomorrow?" 6 a.m., I said. "And Greg leaves for the distribution center at 7:30, Grandpa calculated. He looked toward the kitchen door, which led out to the garage. "You go to work tomorrow. Keep your head down, serve the coffee. Let an old mechanic do some poking around." I went to work the next morning, and the morning after that. For 5 days I lived in a state of quiet panic. I bought a box of heavy-duty hefty trash bags from the corner store and started putting my clothes into them at night. During my breaks at the diner, I scrolled through Craigslist on my phone, looking at ads for $550 shared rooms out in Gresham that required a background check and a double deposit I didn't have. Every time I handed Greg his $800 rent money on the first of the month, I was funding my own trap, and I was running out of time. Then came Wednesday. It was a slow afternoon at Hank's Grill. The lunch rush had cleared out. The air smelled like burnt filter coffee and industrial floor cleaner. I was in the back section, wiping down booth number 4 with a rag and a bottle of blue Windex. The clock above the pie case read exactly 3:15 p.m. The bell above the glass front door chimed. I didn't look up right away, assuming it was just a regular wanting a late coffee. But then I heard the heavy rhythmic hiss-click of a portable oxygen tank rolling across the linoleum floor. I spun around. Grandpa Milton was standing just inside the doorway. He was wearing his faded green Air Force hat and a heavy flannel shirt. He had taken a yellow cab. I could see it idling out by the curb. He looked exhausted, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were locked on me with a fierce, burning intensity I hadn't seen since I was a little girl. Tucked tightly under his left arm was a thick, dusty manila folder with grease stains on the edges. I dropped the Windex bottle on the table and ran over to him. "Grandpa, what are you doing here? You aren't supposed to be out of the house. Did Greg help me to a booth?" he interrupted, his voice rough. I guided him to the corner booth. He sat down heavily, leaning his cane against the window. He placed the oxygen tank on the seat next to him. Then, he dropped the dusty manila folder onto the sticky tabletop right in front of me. "Greg's red steel toolbox," Grandpa said, catching his breath. "The one he locks up tight. He forgot I still have my heavy-duty bolt cutters from 1982 in the garden shed. Took me 20 minutes to snap the padlock." I stared at the folder. My hands suddenly felt cold. "What is this?" "Open it," he said. I reached out and flipped the heavy cover back. The first thing I saw wasn't a bill or a car title. It was a large, thick envelope made of high-quality cream paper. It had been sliced open neatly at the top. In the upper left corner, stamped in deep cardinal red ink, was a crest. Stanford University, Office of Undergraduate Admissions. My stomach dropped. I pulled the folded letter out. The date at the top read March 28, 2022, 2 years ago. "Dear Ms. Myers, congratulations. It is my distinct pleasure to offer you admission to the Stanford University class of 2026. Your academic record, resilience, and unique voice stood out among one of the most competitive applicant pools in our history." I stopped reading. The letters on the page started to blur. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened so hard it physically ached. I wasn't rejected. I was accepted. 2 years ago, while I was sitting in a damp basement crying because I thought I was a failure, this piece of paper was sitting in a locked toolbox in the garage. "Look underneath it," Grandpa said softly. I moved the Stanford letter. Beneath it were 3 more envelopes. Brown University, the University of Washington Honors Program, UC Berkeley, all acceptances, all dated 2 years ago, all opened. Greg hadn't just handed me standard rejection letters. He had printed fake ones off the internet, stuffed them into blank envelopes, and handed them to me at the kitchen table while he hid the real ones. But it wasn't just the letters. At the very bottom of the folder was a Wells Fargo bank statement and a folded piece of official state paperwork. I picked it up. It was a notification from the Oregon Department of Education. It confirmed that I had been awarded the Pioneer Merit Scholarship, a single, lump sum payout of $50,000, intended to cover tuition and housing for an underprivileged, high-achieving student. Attached to the state letter was a high-resolution photocopy of the check itself. It was made out to my name. I flipped the paper over to see the back of the check. Someone had signed my name in blue ink. Underneath it was a second signature, endorsing it over to a joint account, Gregory Thomas. And below that, a bank teller's stamp confirming the check had been deposited into an account I didn't have access to on April 14, 2022. He didn't just steal my future. He stole $50,000 meant for my education, forged my signature, and then charged me $800 a month to live in his basement. I sat there in the diner booth, holding the photocopy of the check. The hum of the diner fridge faded out. The smell of the coffee disappeared. I wasn't crying. I was too completely shattered to cry. For 2 years I had apologized to this man. I had thanked him for letting me stay in his house. I had scrubbed toilets and poured coffee for truck drivers, believing I wasn't smart enough to do anything else. "He locked your life in a box, kid," Grandpa Milton said, his hand reaching across the table to cover mine. His grip was weak, but his anger was absolute. "He took your mother's life insurance. He took your scholarship, and he convinced you that you were nothing so you would stay and pay his mortgage." I looked up from the papers. The passive, quiet girl who was packing her life into garbage bags was gone. The only thing left in my chest was a cold, sharp clarity. "What bank does Greg use?" I asked, my voice completely steady. "Wells Fargo," Grandpa said. "The big branch on Powell Boulevard, the one he deposits his distribution center checks into every Wednesday afternoon, around 5 p.m. I looked at the clock above the pie case. It was 3:40 p.m. I unfastened my diner apron, stood up, and dropped it on the table over the Windex bottle. I didn't tell my manager I was leaving. I didn't clock out. I gathered the letters and the forged check, put them back into the dusty folder, and helped my grandfather out of the booth. We walked out of Hank's Grill into the bright afternoon sun. The yellow cab was still idling by the curb, exhaust swirling in the warm air. I opened the heavy yellow door and helped Grandpa Milton slide into the back seat. I placed his oxygen tank on the floorboard. The inside of the cab smelled like stale pine air freshener and old leather. I climbed in next to him and shut the door. I held the dusty manila folder tightly against my chest. I could feel the thick, expensive paper of the Stanford envelope through the cardboard. Wells Fargo on Powell Boulevard, I told the driver. The cab pulled away from the curb. I looked at my grandfather. He was breathing hard, resting his hands on his cane. "Grandpa, we can't just walk up to a bank teller with a photocopy of a check," I said. "They won't talk to us. My name isn't on Greg's bank account." Grandpa adjusted his green veteran hat and looked out the window. "I know that," he said. "That is why I didn't come straight to the diner after I broke the lock." I leaned closer to him. "What did you do?" "At 2:15 p.m., I called the Portland Police non-emergency line," Grandpa explained, his voice low and raspy over the hum of the cab's tires. "The desk sergeant told me it sounded like a domestic civil dispute. He said I would have to file a report in person and wait weeks for a detective. We don't have weeks. Greg wants you out by the 15th. I nodded slowly. The police always treated family money issues like personal drama. "So, I looked at the state seal on your scholarship letter," Grandpa continued. "I called the Pioneer Merit Foundation office in Salem. I got a very nice woman on the phone. I gave her your name and social security number. She pulled your file. She told me the $50,000 check was cashed 2 years ago. I told her the signature was forged, and the money went into a joint account belonging to Gregory Thomas." Grandpa turned his head and looked right at me. "Stealing a state-funded educational grant and forging a signature to cross state banking lines isn't a family dispute, kid," he said. "It is a federal crime. The woman in Salem patched me through to the local field office of the FBI, a white-collar financial crimes unit." My breath caught in my throat. "You called the FBI?" "I spoke to a federal fraud investigator named Marcus Vance," Grandpa said. "I read him the exact routing numbers stamped on the back of the check copy. Vance ran Greg's name through his system. Turns out, the bank had already flagged Greg's account 6 months ago for suspicious cash deposits from the auto parts center. This forged check gave them the missing piece they needed to open a full file." The cab turned a sharp corner onto Powell Boulevard. "Agent Vance told me to meet him at the branch at 4:45 p.m., Grandpa said. "He is already there." We pulled into the large asphalt parking lot of the Wells Fargo. It was 4:30 p.m. The sun was starting to dip behind the tall pine trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. I paid the driver with a crumpled $20 bill from my tip money. We walked through the sliding glass doors. The bank lobby was quiet. The air conditioning was freezing. It smelled like clean carpet and printer ink. There were 3 tellers working behind the long counter. In the far corner, sitting in a leather chair in the waiting area, was a man in a plain gray suit. He didn't look like a movie agent. He looked like an accountant. He had a scuffed leather briefcase on his lap and a blue lanyard around his neck. When he saw Grandpa's green hat, he stood up and walked over to us. "Milton?" the man asked. "Agent Vance," Grandpa said, shaking his hand. Grandpa pointed to me. "This is my granddaughter, the one whose name is on the check." Agent Vance looked at me. His eyes were tired but very sharp. "Do you have the folder?" he asked quietly. I handed it to him. We walked over to a small, empty desk near the loan officer cubicles. Vance opened the folder. He read the Stanford acceptance letter. He looked at the other 3 college letters. Then, he pulled out the state scholarship document and the photocopy of the check. He pulled a small tablet out of his briefcase and typed something in. He stared at his screen for a long time. "The endorsement signature on the back of this check does not match the signature on your state ID," Vance said, looking at me. "Furthermore, the funds were deposited directly into a business holding account registered solely to Gregory Thomas, not a joint account for education, a holding account." Vance closed his tablet and put it back into his briefcase. He didn't look excited. He looked like a man who did this every single day. "Mr. Thomas comes in every Wednesday to make a physical deposit for his distribution center," Vance said, checking his silver wristwatch. "Usually right before they lock the doors at 5 p.m. I looked at the large analog clock on the bank wall. It read 4:56 p.m. "What happens now?" I asked. My hands were shaking. I shoved them deep into my jean pockets so nobody would see. "Now," Agent Vance said, standing up and buttoning his gray suit jacket. "We wait for him to walk through those doors, and when he does, you are going to let me do the talking." The bank was mostly empty. One customer was finishing up at the teller window. The security guard was standing near the entrance, holding a set of keys, getting ready to lock up. The clock ticked. 4:57 p.m., 4:58 p.m. At exactly 4:59 p.m., the sliding glass doors hummed open. A shadow fell across the carpet. Greg walked in. He was wearing his heavy work boots and a blue polo shirt with the Auto Center logo on the chest. He held a thick bank deposit bag tucked under his arm. He was looking down at his phone, completely relaxed, completely confident. The man who had locked my life in a steel box was walking right toward us. Greg walked straight to the second teller window. He didn't look left or right. He unzipped his jacket, pulled out a thick navy blue canvas deposit bag, and dropped it on the laminate counter. The metal zipper clinked sharply against the glass partition. "Hey Brenda," Greg said. His voice echoed slightly in the quiet bank, loud and confident. "Made it just under the wire. Usual weekly drop for the center." Brenda smiled, typing on her keyboard. "Cutting it close today, Mr. Thomas." Agent Vance stood up from the small desk. He didn't rush. He walked across the carpet with the measured, heavy steps of a man who held all the cards. I stayed right where I was, my hands gripping the rubber handles of Grandpa Milton's wheelchair. Vance stopped 3 feet behind Greg. "Gregory Thomas?" Greg didn't even turn his body all the way around. He just looked over his shoulder, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "Yeah, I'm in the middle of a transaction. The loan officer's desk is over there." Vance reached into his suit jacket. He didn't pull out a gun or a pair of handcuffs. He pulled out a small leather wallet and flipped it open. A gold shield caught the harsh fluorescent light of the bank. "Special Agent Marcus Vance, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I need you to step away from the counter." The bank went completely dead. Brenda stopped typing. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. The security guard by the door turned around, his hand dropping away from his keys. Greg's annoyed expression froze. He looked at the badge, then up at Vance's face. He let out a short, nervous breath that sounded like a scoff. "FBI? For what? If this is about the distribution center's quarterly taxes, my accountant already filed an extension. This isn't about the auto center," Vance interrupted. His voice dropped an octave, making it impossible for anyone outside a 10-foot radius to hear. "I am here regarding a $50,000 state-issued check from the Pioneer Merit Foundation, deposited into your sole proprietor business holding account on April 14, 2022. Greg's hand, which was resting on the counter, twitched. His fingers curled inward, scratching against the laminate. "The check was issued to your stepdaughter," Vance continued, pulling the folded photocopy out of his briefcase. "The endorsement signature on the back does not match her legal state ID. We believe it was forged to bypass banking regulations and intercept federal student aid." All the color drained from Greg's face. The confident, untouchable man who demanded $800 in cash on the first of every month suddenly looked very small. That was a family matter," Greg stammered, his voice suddenly thin. "My wife passed away. I handled the finances for the household. It was a joint decision to cover outstanding medical debts." "No, it wasn't." Grandpa Milton's raspy voice cut through the silence. Greg snapped his head around. He looked past Agent Vance. For the first time since walking through the sliding glass doors, he looked at the waiting area. He saw Grandpa Milton sitting in the wheelchair, the green veteran hat pulled low, and he saw me standing right beside him. I wasn't wearing my diner apron. I wasn't looking at the floor. I was looking dead into his eyes, and tucked tightly under my arm was his heavy, dusty manila folder. The one he thought was locked securely inside his red steel toolbox in the garage. The one holding the 4 Ivy League acceptance letters he told me I never got. Greg's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted from the folder in my hands, to Grandpa Milton, to the FBI badge, and back to the folder. His brain was trying to build a lie, trying to find a way out, but there were no doors left. The math was the math, just like he always said. The physiological crash happened all at once. His chest heaved. A thick sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. He took half a step backward, his heavy work boots squeaking against the tile floor. He looked frantically at the teller, then at the ceiling, then at the floor. He brought a shaking hand up to his mouth. Right next to the deposit slip station was a tall gray plastic trash can. Greg lunged for it. He grabbed the plastic rim with both hands, leaned over, and violently threw up into the plastic liner. The terrible sound echoed in the silent bank lobby. Brenda covered her mouth and took 3 quick steps back from the glass window. The security guard shifted uncomfortably on his feet, looking away. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I watched the man who had convinced me I was a failure, the man who had forced me to sleep in a damp basement while he stole my future, bend over a garbage can in the middle of a bank lobby, completely broken by the truth he thought he had buried. Agent Vance waited patiently, his hands clasped casually in front of him. He didn't blink, he didn't step back. When Greg finally stood up, his face was the color of wet ash. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his chest heaving. "Mr. Thomas," Agent Vance said, his voice completely level, "I am giving you the opportunity to step into the branch manager's office voluntarily to discuss the details of this deposit and the missing state funds. If you decline, I will request local PD to transport you downtown in a marked vehicle. It is your choice." Greg looked around the bank lobby. Brenda was already locking her cash drawer, refusing to make eye contact. The security guard had his hand resting near his radio. Greg looked back at me. His eyes were wide, pleading, desperate. The authoritarian mask he had worn for 2 years was entirely gone, replaced by the panicked look of a man who realized there was no escape. "I kept a roof over your head," Greg whispered, his voice cracking. "After your mother died, I paid the bills. I fed you. You have no idea how much debt she left us." I gripped the handles of my grandfather's wheelchair. My hands weren't shaking anymore. "My mother left a $200,000 life insurance policy," I said, my voice steady enough to carry across the quiet lobby. "You stole that. Then you stole my $50,000 scholarship. And then you charged me $800 a month to sleep on concrete. You didn't keep a roof over my head, Greg. You kept me hostage." Greg opened his mouth to argue, but Agent Vance stepped between us, cutting off his line of sight. "This way, Mr. Thomas," Vance said, gesturing toward a frosted glass door near the back of the bank. Greg didn't fight, he didn't yell, his shoulders slumped forward, and he walked slowly toward the back office, leaving his heavy canvas deposit bag sitting abandoned on the teller counter. Vance followed him and closed the frosted glass door behind them. The lock clicked. I stood in the lobby for a long moment, listening to the hum of the air conditioning. The terrible weight that had been sitting on my chest for 2 years, the crushing belief that I was stupid, that I was a burden, that I was a failure, started to lift. It didn't disappear completely, but for the first time since my mother died, I could breathe. "Let's go home," Grandpa Milton said quietly. I pushed him out through the sliding glass doors. The sun had dipped lower, casting an orange glow over the parking lot. Our cab was gone, so I pulled out my phone and ordered a rideshare. We rode back to the house in silence. I held the dusty manila folder tightly against my leg. It was 6:15 p.m. when we pulled into the driveway. Greg's truck wasn't there. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I left for my diner shift that morning, but everything inside it had changed. I helped Grandpa Milton up the front steps and unlocked the door. The television was blaring from the living room. Tyler was sprawled out on the sectional sofa, wearing athletic shorts, playing a first-person shooter game on his Xbox. Empty soda cans were scattered across the coffee table. He didn't pause his game when we walked in. "You better be done packing," Tyler said, his eyes glued to the screen. I tracked the shipping on my squat rack. "It's coming 2 days early. I need that basement cleared out by tomorrow night." I let go of Grandpa's wheelchair. I walked into the living room and picked up the television remote from the coffee table. I pressed the power button. The screen went black. The sudden silence in the house was deafening. Tyler dropped his controller and shot up from the couch, his face turning red. "What is your problem?" "I was in the middle of a ranked match. Turn it back on and go pack your garbage." I didn't yell. I didn't back away. I looked at the boy who had spent his entire life getting everything handed to him while I paid for the privilege of existing in his shadow. "I'm not packing anything," I said. Tyler stepped forward, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Are you stupid? My dad told you to get out. It's his house. If you don't pack your stuff, I'm going to throw it all on the front lawn myself." "Your dad isn't coming home tonight, Tyler," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. Tyler froze. The anger in his eyes flickered into confusion. "What are you talking about?" "He is currently sitting in a back office at the Wells Fargo on Powell Boulevard with an investigator from the FBI, I said. "He forged my signature on a $50,000 state grant and hid my college acceptance letters so he could charge me rent. The bank flagged his accounts. He is being investigated for federal financial fraud." Tyler stared at me. He looked over at Grandpa Milton, waiting for the punchline, waiting for someone to say it was a joke. But Grandpa just sat by the doorway, his hands resting on his cane, looking at Tyler with absolute disgust. "You're lying," Tyler stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed Greg's number. We all stood in the living room and listened. Deep inside the house, in Greg's locked home office, A phone started ringing. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. Greg had left his personal phone on his desk when he went to run his quick bank errand. Tyler slowly lowered the phone. "This isn't your dad's house anymore," Grandpa Milton said, his raspy voice echoing in the quiet room. "Because the state is going to audit every single dime he spent over the last 2 years, and the first thing they are going to look at is how he paid the mortgage." Tyler stared at his phone screen. He didn't say a word for a full 10 seconds. Then, his thumb moved. He tapped the screen and dialed another number. I could see the contact name. It was the night shift manager at Greg's Auto Parts Distribution Center. Tyler put the phone on speaker. It rang twice. "Yeah, hello?" a gruff voice answered. "Mike, it's Tyler. Is my dad there?" "Tyler?" "Man, it is an absolute mess down here," Mike said. His voice was loud, panicked. 2 black vans pulled up 20 minutes ago. Guys in windbreakers are carrying out filing cabinets and computer hard drives. They told everybody to clock out and go home. The whole center is shut down. Tyler hit the red button. The call ended. His phone slipped out of his hand and hit the living room carpet with a soft thud. He looked at the empty soda cans on his coffee table. He looked at his Xbox controller. Then, he looked at me. The arrogant, entitled stepbrother who had demanded I clear out of the basement for his weight rack was entirely gone. He just looked like a scared 20-year-old kid who realized his credit card was about to stop working. "What am I supposed to do?" Tyler whispered. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't yell at him either. The anger was gone, replaced by cold facts. "You have until the 15th to figure it out," I said, repeating the exact words his father had used on me at the dining room table. "Because once the FBI audits Greg's accounts, this house is going to be seized." I picked up my dusty manila folder and pushed Grandpa Milton down the hallway to his bedroom. I didn't sleep in the damp basement that night. I slept on the small padded bench at the foot of Grandpa's bed, listening to the steady hiss of his oxygen tank. It was the first time in 2 years I didn't wake up in a panic. At exactly 8:15 a.m. the next morning, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown Portland number. I answered it in the kitchen while pouring a bowl of generic Cheerios. "Miss Myers," Agent Vance's voice was crisp and professional. "I need you to come down to the federal building on 3rd Avenue. We need your signature on a sworn affidavit to officially enter the forged check into evidence." "Is Greg there?" I asked. I set my spoon down. "Mr. Thomas spent the night in a federal holding cell," Vance said. When we presented the forged deposit slip and the business account routing numbers, he waived his right to remain silent. He tried to claim he was simply investing the scholarship money for your future. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. "Investing it?" "Yes," Vance replied dryly. "He invested your $50,000 into a high-risk commercial real estate venture under his own name. The venture went bankrupt 8 months ago. The scholarship money is gone, Ms. Myers, and so is your mother's $200,000 life insurance policy. He used her death benefit to cover his failed business loans, not hospital bills." My chest felt hollow. I knew he had stolen it, but hearing a federal agent confirm the exact numbers made it real. My mother had worked double shifts at Providence Hospital her whole life to leave us a safety net, and Greg had gambled it away on real estate, forcing me to pay his mortgage out of my diner tips. "What happens now?" I asked. "To the house? To my grandfather?" "The house was put up as collateral for his business loans," Vance explained. "The bank will foreclose on it within 60 days. But right now my priority is your student file." Vance paused. I could hear papers shuffling on his end of the line. "I spoke to the director of the Pioneer Merit Foundation in Salem this morning," Vance continued. "Because you are the documented victim of identity theft and federal wire fraud, they are opening a special review board. They want to speak with you." I stared at the bowl of cereal. 2 days ago I thought I was going to be homeless. Now the FBI was calling the state capitol for me. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. I hung up the phone. The house was completely silent. I walked into the hallway. Tyler's bedroom door was shut. I could hear him quietly arguing on the phone with his mother, Greg's first wife, asking if he could move into her apartment in Seattle. The Oregon State tuition check Greg had written for him from the business account was going to bounce by Friday. I walked into Grandpa's room. He was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, putting on his green veteran hat. "Was that the agent?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. "Yes," I said. "We need to go downtown. Greg lost all the money in a real estate scam. The house is going into foreclosure." Grandpa Milton didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly. "A man who lies about small things will always steal big things. Get my coat, kid. We have paperwork to sign." We left the house at 9 a.m. I didn't leave a note for Tyler. I didn't care about the squat rack or the basement rent anymore. I was finally walking out of the front door, and for the first time since I was 17, I wasn't carrying Greg's bags. The drive to downtown Portland took exactly 25 minutes. We parked in a concrete garage on 4th Avenue that charged $12 an hour. I pushed Grandpa Milton's wheelchair over the uneven sidewalks toward the federal courthouse. The building was massive, made of gray stone and tinted glass. We went through the metal detectors at the front entrance, the security guards carefully checking Grandpa's oxygen tank. Agent Vance was waiting for us on the 3rd floor. He led us down a long, quiet hallway with fluorescent lights humming overhead. He opened the door to conference room 3B. Sitting at the long conference table was a woman in a sharp navy blazer. She had a thick file folder open in front of her. "Miss Myers, Milton," Agent Vance said, closing the door behind us. "This is Eleanor Hayes. She is the regional director of the Pioneer Merit Foundation. She drove up from Salem this morning." Eleanor stood up. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with deep, professional respect. She reached out and shook my hand firmly. "Please, sit down," she said. I helped Grandpa wheel up to the table, then took the seat next to him. My heart was pounding against my ribs. Eleanor opened her folder. Inside, I saw a copy of the police report, the bank deposit slips, and my high school transcripts. But sitting right on top was a printed piece of paper I hadn't seen in over 2 years. "When Agent Vance called my office yesterday, I pulled your original scholarship application," Eleanor said, tapping the paper. "Do you remember the essay you submitted?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, it was about my mother. About how she worked double shifts at Providence Hospital so I could have a quiet place to study." Eleanor nodded. "It was the highest scoring essay in Multnomah County that year. The review board didn't just select you because of your GPA. We selected you because you possessed a resilience that most adults never develop. We wanted to invest in your future." I looked down at my hands. For 2 years, Greg had convinced me I was nothing but a burden, a girl who wasn't smart enough to get into a real college. Hearing this woman tell me I had earned the highest score in the county made my throat tight. "The $50,000 that Gregory Thomas stole is currently locked in a federal asset forfeiture investigation," Eleanor explained, her tone turning strictly to business. "Because he lost the funds in a bankrupt commercial venture, it could take years for the courts to recover the money." "You don't have years." I felt a sudden drop in my stomach. "I understand," I said quietly. "No, I don't think you do," Eleanor said, offering a small, reassuring smile. "The foundation is fully insured against institutional fraud. We are not waiting for the courts. First thing this morning, the board authorized an emergency discretionary release. We are issuing a brand new $50,000 grant directly to you. It will be placed into a secure trust account by Friday. Greg Thomas will never be able to touch a single penny." I stopped breathing for a second. Grandpa Milton reached over and placed his rough, warm hand on my shoulder. "But that isn't the only phone call I made this morning," Eleanor continued. She pulled out a fresh, cream-colored envelope. It had the same cardinal red crest I had seen in the diner, Stanford University. "I spoke directly with the Dean of Admissions at Stanford at 7:30 a.m., Eleanor said. "I forwarded them Agent Vance's preliminary fraud report. When a student fails to enroll due to documented federal identity theft, the university has protocols. They are retroactively applying a deferment to your original acceptance." She slid the envelope across the table. "Your spot in the freshman class is secure. You start in September." I stared at the envelope. I didn't open it. I just rested my hand flat on top of it. The damp basement, the smell of the diner, the $800 rent payments, the heavy trash bags I had packed my clothes into, it was all dissolving. I wasn't trapped anymore. "Thank you," I whispered. It was the only thing I could manage to say. Agent Vance slid a stack of legal papers across the table next. "These are the sworn affidavits. They detail the timeline of the forgery and the financial theft. Once you and your grandfather sign these, I submit them to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Mr. Thomas will be formally indicted by tomorrow morning." I picked up the black pen Vance offered me. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name on the line, pressing hard enough to leave an indent on the wood table beneath it. Grandpa Milton signed his name next, his hand shaking slightly, but his signature bold and clear. We left the federal building at 11:45 a.m. When we got back to the house in southeast Portland, the driveway was empty. Tyler's car was gone. I pushed Grandpa inside. The house was a disaster. The living room was completely stripped. Tyler had taken the television, his Xbox, the microwave, and anything else he could easily pawn or fit into his trunk. He had left the front door unlocked and abandoned the house. He was running from the fallout, leaving the mess behind, exactly like his father always did. I didn't care. The house belonged to the bank now anyway. I walked down the creaky wooden stairs to the basement one last time. It still smelled like cinder blocks and wet laundry. I grabbed the heavy-duty hefty bags I had packed my clothes into. Then, I walked over to the corner, where an old cardboard box sat pushed against the water heater. It was my mother's box. Greg had thrown it down here the week after she died, saying he didn't want the clutter upstairs. I opened the flaps. Inside were her old nursing scrubs, a few photo albums, and the cheap plastic name tag she wore at the hospital. I carefully placed the Stanford envelope right on top of her name tag. I carried the box upstairs. I wasn't a liability. I wasn't a bad investment. I was exactly the person my mother raised me to be. We didn't stay in that house for another night. The bank was going to seize it anyway, and the air inside felt completely dead. I used the remaining $300 in my checking account to rent a cheap motel room out by the interstate for 2 nights. It had thin walls and smelled like industrial bleach, but it was on the ground floor, and it wasn't the basement. By Friday morning, the Pioneer Merit Foundation had wired the first $10,000 of my new trust directly into a secure account at a local credit union. I didn't buy anything flashy. I bought time and safety. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment on the ground floor of an older building in Milwaukee. The rent was $1,450 a month. It didn't have granite countertops or central air, but the floors were clean laminate, and the windows let in actual sunlight. There was no water heater humming next to my bed. I moved Grandpa Milton into the larger bedroom because it had a sliding glass door that opened up to a small patch of grass. I bought him a new, quieter oxygen concentrator that Medicare actually covered once I filled out the paperwork Greg had refused to submit. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Agent Vance. "Just calling to give you an update, Ms. Myers," he said. His voice sounded a little less tense than it had in the bank lobby. "Gregory Thomas accepted a federal plea deal this morning." I sat down on my new thrift store sofa. "A plea deal?" "Wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement of federal funds," Vance explained. "He didn't want to risk a jury trial with the paper trail we had. The judge sentenced him to 74 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised financial probation. He is also required to pay full restitution, though it will likely be garnished from whatever minimum wage job he gets when he gets out. 74 months. A little over 6 years. "What about the auto center?" I asked. "Seized by the commercial lenders to cover his bad debts," Vance said. "The house in southeast Portland officially went into foreclosure yesterday. The locks have been changed." I thanked him and hung up the phone. I didn't cheer. I didn't feel a sudden rush of victory. I just felt a deep, profound exhaustion leave my bones. I heard a rumor from an old high school friend a few weeks later about Tyler. He didn't make it to Seattle. His mother's apartment didn't have room for him. He was renting a room above a laundromat in Gresham and working the overnight shift at a fulfillment center, boxing up packages for $16.50 an hour. The boy who demanded I clear out my life so he could build a home gym was finally learning what it cost to survive in the real world. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't owe him anything. The summer passed quietly. I didn't go back to the diner. I spent my days reading the AP history books I had boxed away, drinking coffee on our small patio, and sitting with Grandpa Milton. His health was still declining. The doctors couldn't reverse the damage to his lungs, but he looked more at peace than he had in years. He sat in his wheelchair by the sliding glass door, wearing his green veteran hat, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes on the sidewalk. In mid-August, 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for California, I walked into the living room. Grandpa was awake, holding the cream-colored Stanford envelope in his lap. "You need to start packing your bags, kid," he said, his voice raspy. "Orientation is in 14 days. I sat down in the chair next to him. "I looked into the housing portal," I said carefully. "I can defer for another semester. I can stay here with you. The apartment is paid up through the end of the year." Grandpa Milton turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were sharp, carrying the same fierce intensity they had the day he walked into the diner with the dusty manila folder. "If you don't get on that plane to Palo Alto, I will wheel myself all the way to California and drag you there," he said sternly, though a small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't break a padlock with bolt cutters so you could sit in an apartment in Milwaukee." "But your treatments?" "My treatments are handled. The visiting nurse comes 3 times a week. I have the emergency button on my wrist," he interrupted. He reached out and tapped the Stanford envelope. "Your mother worked double shifts so you could open this letter. You earned it. Now go use it." I left for California on a Tuesday morning. It was raining, that fine misty Portland drizzle that coats the streets in a thin layer of silver. The yellow cab pulled up to the curb outside our Milwaukee apartment at exactly 6 a.m. I zipped up my heavy canvas suitcase. It held everything I owned, which wasn't much, but it was finally mine. Tucked safely inside my carry-on backpack, right next to my mother's plastic hospital name tag, was the cream-colored envelope with the Stanford crest. Grandpa Milton insisted on rolling his wheelchair out to the small concrete patio to watch me leave. He had his oxygen tank humming quietly beside him, and his green veteran hat pulled low against the morning chill. I walked over and wrapped my arms around him. I hugged him for a long time. His frail hands gripped my jacket, his hold surprisingly strong. "Keep your head up, kid," he rasped into my ear, "and don't ever let anyone tell you what you cost." I pulled back and smiled, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "I'll call you the second I land at SFO, Grandpa. The visiting nurse will be here at noon. You better call," he said, tapping his cane against the patio floorboards. "Or I'll call the FBI on you too." I laughed. It was a real, full laugh, the kind that starts deep in your chest and shakes loose the last bits of fear. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and walked out to the waiting cab. As the car merged onto Interstate 84 toward the airport, I looked out the window and watched the city wake up. I thought about the 2 years I spent pouring cheap coffee at Hank's Grill, scrubbing tables with blue Windex, believing I was an absolute failure because Greg had handed me fake letters at a kitchen table. I thought about how terrifyingly easy it is to let someone else write your story if you never asked to see the pen. Greg was sitting in a federal cell, learning to live with the consequences of his own greed. Tyler was taping up cardboard boxes on a midnight shift, realizing the world didn't owe him anything. And I was heading toward a future I had earned the right to step into. Grandpa was right, the math really was the math. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. If you have ever been told you weren't enough, if you have ever been made to feel small in your own home, or if you have ever had to break open a lock just to find your own worth, then you know exactly how the air in that cab felt. It felt like breathing for the very first time. If you found a piece of your own quiet strength in this journey, please like and subscribe to stay with me. The darkest chapters are usually just the ones right before you finally fly.